I call Andrew Bailey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to be talking on the Taxation, Land Information and Offshore Persons Information Bill. This bill provides wide-ranging measures and controls to ensure that people involved in land transactions are well informed of their obligations and responsibilities. Its provisions give the means for all transactions to comply with our tax laws, which should result in improving the fairness in the property market. And I do want to note that it is part of a much wider range of package that the government has been introducing to address housing issues and to make sure that Kiwis can buy their own home and get on the property ladder. Those measures include the Home Start package, and a valuable contribution, a very generous package that the government's introduced. It's going to also include the RMA reforms that will be introduced during the term of this government, and also the significant work that's been done around increasing the housing supply, including the 84 special housing areas that we've got in Auckland, which is a particular area of interest. I do also want to reiterate some of the points I've said in this House before. In my very own electorate, in the Hanua electorate, I can point to 10,000 sections coming onto the market over the next 6 years. So the substantial efforts that have been made to address the housing supply is just one of a number of measures that we put in place. Now, just turning to the bill, I think this is a very smart piece of legislation. First of all, it reinforces the tax obligations that people buying and selling properties need to adhere to. And secondly, it deals with the perception, which has been perpetuated by the opposition, that wholesale numbers of foreign people have been coming into New Zealand and buying and selling our properties. And all they've just talked about is how we should be putting in place a register. But these measures that have been introduced today are much more comprehensive than that. That's right. The objective of this bill is essentially that it confirms the value that this government places on home ownership and to create the right environment for people to own a home and to build strong communities. As we've heard earlier, this year the government will introduce a bright line test to just confirm those tax liabilities on residential homes, particularly when they're resold. And the gains from residential property that are sold within 2 years are going to be very clear, crystal clear, in fact. Unless that property is the seller's main home, or secondly, is inherited as part of a deceased estate, or thirdly, has been transferred as part of a relationship property settlement, commonly referred to a divorce, then if you sell your home within 2 years, at that point it is assumed that you are essentially a trader. So we've clearly separated out areas that we believe there should be no tax paid on it, and that is fair. But if you don't fit within those three criteria, then you will be subject to tax changes. And in my personal view, I believe that's a very balanced approach. The objective, of course, is to ensure that tax on property is paid when it's effectively due, and to also ensure that property speculators are actually paying their full amount of tax. Now, these bright line tests will obviously be subject to review by the Select Committee, but that clarity is, my view, absolutely essential and will be a key element of its success. And I just want to note this requirement to pay tax, particularly if you're deemed to be a trader, is part of the existing tax rules. And I've heard some of the opposition's claim that it's a new tax and all that sort of stuff. It's not. The corollary is, if you buy and sell shares on the stock exchange, you're also subject to the same tax rules. And this is what we're trying to do around housing. And the bill will obviously assist the Inland Revenue to enforce the tax obligations. And first of all, if you're a buyer or seller, you will be required to provide an IRD number at the time of doing the property transaction. And this will be part of the conveyancing process, so it will involve an independent part of that process, and those details will be forwarded to the ARD. Now, tax residents from another country will be also required to provide a foreign equivalent of their IRD number, and I think that's a very smart move. But I just do note that if you are a New Zealand resident buying and selling your main home, or buying what you intend to be your main home, you will be exempt from that process. Secondly, for offshore persons, they will be obliged to have a New Zealand bank account. And to do that, you'll have to do that prior to getting an IRD number. And that is a wonderful second part of what's been proposed, because not only will that deal with the anti-laundering laws that New Zealand is a party to, the international laws that we're a party to, but it will really start to bite in terms of making sure that we've got appropriate information on those people, those foreign people buying New Zealand residents or homes. And I don't know when you last opened a bank account, but interesting, I asked someone this morning to just
remind the members, the members bringing me into the debate all the time. It's best to use the third person by saying when one opens a bank account or one does something, as opposed to saying you. So I'm not, and I haven't opened a bank account recently. Andrew Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So if one opens a bank account, it is very, very difficult, and it takes some time. And so when you go into the bank, not only do you have to provide a photo ID or a passport, but you've also got, in many cases, to provide some form of proof of residential address, such as the New Zealand Utilities Bill. And by getting the bank to capture that information, that's the way to make sure that people who want to get around the system, not be part of the New Zealand laws, that information is automatically accounted for and captured by an independent body. And it also ensures that we deal with people who are essentially cash buyers coming into the New Zealand market who may not want to or have a need to borrow money, and it circumvents it by forcing them to actually open that bank account. The other part of it is there's a requirement for those people to actually get an IRD number, and until that information is provided to the bank then assumes that you're on the highest tax rate. I also note that the Minister talked about investigating the introduction of withholding tax on people selling property for non-residents, and I think that's another important thing that the Select Committee will turn its mind to. However, I want to just now talk about the areas where the exemption will not apply. And that is if the home has been bought by a trust, or if even if a person, a New Zealand resident or someone like that, has been acquiring a home but buying and selling it 2 or 3 times during the course of that initial 2 years. Those are not grounds for exemption under these rules, and it will ensure that overseas buyers and speculators are captured again by these provisions that have been proposed under this bill. Part of the measures also deal with the issue of trusts, and obviously there's concern about not only New Zealanders but foreigners using trusts to hide their interests. And as we heard from the Minister today, if you use a trust, you will be required to provide your IRD number. And if that trust has anyone or any interest that holds 25% or more and they are a foreign resident, then they will be automatically captured under these rules. And I'm glad that they've got that, the Minister's been proposing that. And also what she talked about earlier, that it's easy to set up a trust and then subsequently vest that into new ownership. And if there are any subsequent transactions, again, that's going to be captured in this bill, which again are excellent provisions. Last thing I want to turn my mind to is the LINZ requirements. That is an important further step in providing, capturing that information and having an independent party to record that information. And To me, this is an excellent start towards dealing with this whole issue. I commend the bill to the House.